with all the participants. Therefore, I hope you will not miss many of the points, important points, as a matter of fact, of each of these presentations. Now, just to set the discussion, as we have heard during the plenary, that there are a number of issues that are very important in the context of discussions of urban poverty. I would like to pick up two major points. One, I think, like in the discussion, it is quite evident that urban poverty is not residual. We need to know about the whole process of urbanization and the place of urban poverty in the current process, and what is about urban development. We may have to rethink about the whole issue of urbanization in the context of Bangladesh. And secondly, urban poverty, with the evidence that was presented in the discussions, quite clearly suggests that urban poverty has its own specific nature and dynamics. In particular, the way in which urban residents experience poverty differently in terms of their location of residence, in terms of their gender, in terms of other different characteristics, and so on. Therefore, I think overall urban poverty dynamics is probably more complex and has a number of dimensions. Now, in order to understand this whole process of dynamics and the other aspects of urban poverty within the overall framework of urbanization, I think one of the important preconditions is to understand the concepts of poverty and the indicators of urban poverty in the context of Bangladesh. So in the first session, there are a number of very important presentations by our distinguished scholars on urban poverty on these issues. So since our time is limited, I would request all our presenters to economize as much as possible in terms of the presentation so that we do have some time, hopefully, for open floor discussions. Now, first of all, I would like to invite, I will go by the order in which it is presented in the program. First of all, I would invite Monica Yanes Pagans, economist, Poverty Global Practice, South Asia Region, World Bank, and she will be speaking on analytical and policy approaches to urban poverty.
Thank you very much. I think I'm a little bit short for this, so let me see if perhaps coming here, you might be able to see me a little bit better. So I'll try to economize some time following the suggestions, and I'll just try to keep perhaps 10 minutes to highlight what are some of the most important, basically, findings that I want to present to you today. So this presentation has three different objectives, and the main one is presenting to you the main preliminary findings that we are finding from a survey that the World Bank has conducted earlier this year on urban slums in the Dhaka City Corporation. In the process of designing this survey and working in its implementation, we have been able to learn many different things about slums here in Bangladesh, which allow illustrating a lot of the challenges that people and researchers might actually face when trying to study slums. Okay, thank you. Therefore, after presenting the findings, I'm also going to highlight some of these main challenges that we encounter and what these challenges might mean in terms of implications for potential future analytical work that may inform the agenda on poverty in slum areas. And well, a third objective of this presentation as well is just trying to advocate on the importance of us to basically work in a coordinated manner to try to expand our knowledge base in terms of what slums are, what they mean for urban poverty, so that a lot of this evidence can be accumulated and can be used to actually inform the design of urban policies aimed at alleviating and improving the lives of people in urban slums. Let me start by showing to you this graph that already a couple of presenters have discussed in some ways. Basically, this is showing the poverty rates in Bangladesh since the year 1990 until the year 2010, which is the latest years for which we actually have a poverty estimate available for the country. The poverty rates that I'm showing here to you have been estimated separately for urban and rural areas, and we can see clearly that there is a downward trend in both of these lines, which basically is showing the strong commitment by the government of Bangladesh over the past years to reduce poverty reduction. As expected, as in most countries, basically the urban poverty rates are much lower than those observed in the rural areas. However, if we look at this information a little bit more different and we focus on the graph on the right-hand side, we'll get to see that in the year 1990, 15 out of each 100% of the poor people in Bangladesh were living in urban areas. By the year 2010, 21 out of each 100% of the poor people in Bangladesh were living in the urban areas. This is actually basically showing that over time, although just in basically poverty rates, the urban poverty is improving, actually the number of poor are increasingly being actually concentrated in urban areas. So why we should care about slums, basically? Why slums are important for understanding urban poverty? Basically, slums seem to actually matter quite substantially. Let me show you this graph, which shows some statistics produced by the UN Habitat in the year 2013, which basically show that based on their estimates, around 30% of all the residents in urban areas at the global level are actually living in slum areas. This is actually quite high, and it was quite shocking for me to find this out. In the case of Bangladesh, what is the situation on slums? So basically, one of the most interesting findings perhaps that we actually identified when starting this work was that actually in Bangladesh there are multiple definitions of slums. There's not just one single definition. And some of those definitions are much narrower and some are much broader. And intrinsically, there is nothing wrong in having actually many definitions of slums. Actually, it's actually a quite good thing, because then you can even start thinking about slums not just in dichotomic terms, when one thing is either a slum or not a slum, but you can actually start thinking about slums more in a continuum, where basically you may have different concepts of slums. What is really problematic, though, in the case of Bangladesh, is that depending on what type of definition you use, you will find humongous variation in the share of the population in urban areas that seems to be living in these areas. For instance, some of the most narrow definitions suggest that this number is just 6% of the urban population, what some of the more broader ones suggest that this number might be as high as 62. So clearly there is a humongous difference, and what is difficult, I guess, from a researcher's perspective, is that there is no clear way on how these different definitions intersect with each other. Another issue that we have been able to identify as part of preparing this study, it's basically that actually slums and the spatial distribution of poverty in urban areas is quite much more complex than the one we might observe in rural areas. What do I mean with that? If we go to a rural area and just look around, it's highly likely that we're going to find people that are very similar nearby. But what happens in urban areas? And to illustrate this point, let's have a look at that picture there that a lot of you probably recognize. That's the Korail slum, which is a big slum located very close to the Gulshan area, one of the richest areas basically in the city. So basically, if you just focus on very aggregated statistics and look at places close to that area, you may actually mistaken just get statistics that show that people there are extremely rich or that they are extremely poor. What basically this means is that the poverty maps that normally the government uses, which inform a lot of decisions, actually are not able to capture this richness in the urban heterogeneity in terms of income and consumption. So this basically suggests that moving forward to understand poverty, we need to start thinking more creatively on how to design instruments that may allow us to get at more granularity in the poverty statistics than when a traditional poverty map normally is showing to us. So let me explain to you here a little bit about what we did. So earlier this year, we actually designed a survey to collect data in slums in the Dhaka City Corporation. The main objective of this survey was to collect consumption data that was fully consistent with the data that BBS collects to construct the official poverty statistics. And with this data, what we were aiming to do, it's basically just producing statistics on poverty levels in slums that may be fully comparable with those produced by BBS and as part of the official statistics. And the main motivation behind this is that, well, the main instrument used by the government to produce poverty statistics is the Household Income and Expenditure Survey, or the HIES. This survey, the latest round, has been collected in the year 2010. And traditionally, actually, the HIES has never included slums as part of its sampling frame. What this means? Well, this just basically means that using the HIES data, there are no inferences that you can actually get to do from slum areas. So although in practice a lot of people tend to mention that actually poverty in slums is quite high, the truth of the matter is that actually poverty in monetary terms has never been actually measured in Bangladesh before. So basically, the good news, I guess, is that BBS now is starting the HIES of 2016, which is currently in the field, actually has improved its sampling frame. And basically now it's actually including slums as part of the sample, which actually it's a fantastic opportunity because once the HIES 2016 data becomes available, this may actually allow us to say something and understand a little bit better about the life in slums from a very national perspective. So our survey actually was focused on the Dhaka City Corporation, and it's basically representative for the entire city corporation. In terms of the sampling design, we have used as the sampling frame the BBS census of slums and floating population, which BBS very kindly allow us to access for us to be able to design the sample. We actually, what we have done in terms of the sampling for stratification is that we actually have looked into the entire list of slums and just tried to identify what different types of slums there are in the Dhaka City Corporation. It was very interesting to see that actually a lot of the slums are quite small, starting from just 5 households, which was not, I guess, the concept I have from my slum, all the way to humongous slums, for instance, like Korail slum. So what we decided is that this type of slums might be very different, that maybe we actually want to design a sample in such a way that we can just pick up a little bit of each of them just to learn about how different they are in terms of living conditions and in terms of poverty rates. So we are actually collecting our data for 3 different groups. Slums that we call the small slums, which have somewhere between 5 and 10 households, medium slums, which have between 11 and 200 households, and big slums, which have more than 200 households. And our statistics can be produced for these 3 different types of slums. And our sample size is a total of 600 households, which was collected from 63 different slums in the Dhaka City Corporation. These graphs down here just very quickly illustrate, on the left-hand side, we have the distribution of slums by stratum, which basically shows that around 95% of all slums in the Dhaka City Corporation have less than 200 households, so a humongous amount of them. But instead, if we actually look at the number of households by stratum, which is the figure on the right, we'll get to see that around 98% of all the slum households live in large slums. So basically, from our sample, if we actually get estimates using the sampling weights, most of the statistics that we are going to get based on population weights are going to be really representative of the larger slums. In terms of our sampling instrument, basically what we have done is collect consumption data, which is exactly identical to the consumption data that BBS collects as part of the HIAS. So basically our survey includes a module identical in terms of consumption to the HIAS 2016. And we also have collected a very detailed survey on basically access to water and sanitation services for this first survey. In terms of field protocol, we also have used and follow very closely the protocols that BBS has established. And in the case of the HIAS, these are quite complex indeed. So basically, each of the household, it's visited for a total of 7 times in 14 days, every 2 days, where they are being asked what type of food and non-food items they consume. So we have followed exactly the same approach, and it took us to collect the data an entire of 21 days. And as part also of the field protocols that we have established for the survey, we've been trying to be very careful in trying to get tracking information from these households. So a lot of all the phone numbers from household members and a lot of key geographic information that potentially may allow us to go back perhaps after a couple of months or after perhaps a year or 6 months and just try to collect additional information from these households. So these are the main findings from this survey. Basically, these are showing the poverty rates in monetary terms for the slums in the Dhaka City Corporation. These are still preliminary findings, but they are clearly showing that basically poverty rates in the Dhaka slums are just 15%. And extreme poverty seems to be just around 3%. To be honest with you, this was a little bit shocking to me. I was expecting perhaps much higher poverty rates in these areas. But this is what the data preliminary is suggesting to us, that basically monetary poverty, although it's definitely a problem, doesn't seem to be a humongous problem in these areas. This other table shows the poverty rates for the different types of slums that we have collected. Interestingly, medium and large size slums have poverty rates that are very close, sitting at around 15%. But if you actually looked into the smallest slums that just have between 5 to 10 households, you'll get to see that their poverty rates are actually 2 times that number. So there is clearly a correlation between poverty rates and the size of the slum. Another interesting finding from this survey is that slums, as many people have mentioned, are extremely dynamic and heterogeneous communities. If you go to a slum and take all adult population, you'll just basically get to see that only 1 of each, basically 10 of them, has been born in the slum. The other 9 are actually coming from outside. So definitely, there seems to be a lot of dynamism and mobility. Also, if you just focus on people that came from outside and see how long they actually have been living in the slum, it seems that around basically 25% of them have just been living there for less than a year. So this is people that really are extremely new to the slum. But on the other side of the spectrum, you also have around 25% of people that have been living there for more than 12 years. So clearly that's not something like a temporary housing, but more like a permanent thing. So there is a variety of people apparently living in the slums, and each of them might be expected to have also very different, perhaps, livelihoods and experience very different economic opportunities. And also poverty rates, as expected, vary quite substantially by the time they have been living in the slum. People that just have came to the slum have much higher poverty rates than people that have spent there much longer times. This contrasts quite substantially with the non-monetary poverty, which is an issue that a lot of the presenters before have highlighted. If we split our sample for known and non-poor households and looked into different of the non-monetary dimensions, we'll get to see that basically there is not that much of a big difference between these households. So basically, if you are a poor household in a slum or a non-poor household, you are still experiencing a lot of overcrowding, you are still experiencing vulnerability, you still have a lot of issues in accessing to good quality services. So basically what this is suggesting overall with our monetary poverty statistics is that basically households in slums are really coming to these areas because they seem to find opportunities in terms of economic opportunities to generate some sort of income that improves their livelihoods. But on the other hand, the conscious trade-off that they are doing is actually accepting to live in conditions that might be much tougher, perhaps, than the ones they might experience before coming to the slums. So this is an important trade-off that needs to be understood and considered when thinking about people living in slums. So just to conclude, a couple of the main key issues that we have found and that we think might inform the path forward in terms of analytics and research in slums in Bangladesh are the first one, as also was highlighted before by other people, poverty in urban areas is quite much more complex than poverty in rural areas. And understanding that would require much more analysis and much more data collection that may enlighten us about some of the living conditions and challenges that people living in this area face. Non-monetary dimensions clearly are a very important part of the history and of all the dynamics within slums. And to this extent, somehow, although looking for ways to improve income generation for these households, probably it's very important, perhaps much more fundamental part in order to try to improve livelihoods in this area might be focusing in policies that may allow to improve actually housing, access to basic services, that may allow these households to be less vulnerable to shocks, to have less vulnerable to different types of things, to violence, and also understanding how these informal community government structures that they have in place operate and can be strengthened to protect them. Another important area, which I already mentioned before, we believe it's very important perhaps to try to understand a little bit better the different definitions of slums in Bangladesh and understand how these intersect so that proper monitoring in these areas can be done, and also that this monitoring is relevant over time and across space and consistent across different instruments. Certainly, there are a lot of possibilities moving forward in terms of how to expand or move things, but I think maybe I already took more than 10 minutes, so I'll just leave this. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Just, if Mr. Shamim Hussain, one of the distinguished presenters, if you are here, can you please come over to the dais? Mr. Shamim Hussain of BRAC Urban Development Program. Now may I request Dr. Deepankar Roy of BBS to present his paper.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good afternoon. When we talk about rural-urban divide or rural-urban variation, I think you could see this graph from HIS 3 rounds, 2000, 2005, and 2010. If you see, there is a clear relationship between rural and urban area. Rural poverty is larger, and you will find urban inequality is higher. But encouraging thing is gradually decreasing. But concern is that poverty gap and squared poverty gap almost stagnant. And if you see a share between 2005 and 2010, you will see the changes between two areas. And if you see the quintile ratio, there is clear inequality exists in Bangladesh. And if you see the top 1%, they share almost 6% of the income. So there is a big gap. And this is the distribution, entire distribution, like bottom half of the distribution, upper half of the distribution, interquartile range, and tails. So here also you will find different ratios and big inequality. My essence of to showing this type of analysis is that it's possible from BBS, though it is National Statistics Office, but we have also scope to analyze data. And nowadays, we are providing policy briefs to the policy makers for clear understanding of this type of inequality. And if you see welfare, because our ultimate goal is to ensure welfare of the society. So there might be inequality and cost of inequality, but at the end of the day, there should be welfare. So if you see urban-rural, urban, though their inequality is higher, but still their welfare is also larger because their mean income is higher than rural areas. So we need to see in-depth analysis for policy formulation. This type of analysis is required. Quintile distribution is clearly showed you the percentage change. If you see the last column, almost 97% income increase between 2005 and 2010. And if you see the lowest to upper quintile, there is also big gap, but the encouraging thing is if you see the upper, then their increment is 94%, but other quintile it's almost 100, around 100. So it is encouraging that inequality is decreasing. And this is the poverty profile. There are 4 types, poverty head count, income gap, poverty gap, squared poverty gap. So if you see all categories and all the periods and all the sectors, you will find urban is lower in poverty sense. Actually, lower incidence exists in urban areas. And this is the income distribution. You can see bottom 40, top 10, and middle 50. So if you see, top differentiates between rural and urban areas, but middle 50 almost stable. So it's global experience. Middle 50 always like stable, but bottom and top they make the changes in inequality scenario. And this is the decile distribution, and very much pronounced in the top decile, and it is very large in urban case. So it's obvious. And it is like crystal clear if you see only top 1%. So how rich that top 1%, and particularly in urban area, very sharp and tall that scale. This is the Lorenz. So urban is larger than rural, it's very clear. And this is interesting graph. If you see just Gini coefficient, it's like almost stagnant. So for policy makers, we should go beyond Gini. So this is the new, relatively new index, Palmer ratio. SDG suggested this ratio. We need to see that it is the ratio of top 10% to the bottom 40%, because middle 50% almost stable everywhere in the world. So this ratio clearly shows you the inequality. This urban area is higher than rural area, and it is very steeper than the Gini coefficient. So there are many types of, various types of inequality we need to see, because only Gini can't serve your purpose. So you need to see the all type of inequality, and one is very nice inequality is Atkinson index, and another is Theil index. So Theil has the strong power, you can decompose the inequality, what Gini fails. And Atkinson, it's like normative measures. So you can put your inequality aversion, and you will find what equivalent distributed income you need. So this is for policy formulation, this type of inequality. And like inequality, there are three types of poverty. Usually we see only FGT class of poverty, Foster, Greer, and Thorbecke, incidence, intensity, and severity. But if you see the Watts index, Shannon index, and SST index, it's more policy relevant. But urban always lower than rural in all aspects. And this is the probability density function. If you see, the median income is shifted towards right. It means our income is increasing over the years, and urban is always larger than rural area. So it's also due to this type of mean income, welfare also larger in urban areas. This is the impact of growth and distribution on poverty. Like if you see 40% in 2005 and 31.5 in 2010, so actual change 8.5. So how it occurs, you can see growth effect, it's negative, but distribution effect is positive. So, and there are interactions. So if there is no inequality, your all could be generated from growth. So we need to care about inequality, particularly in urban areas. And if you see the lower two panel, you will find the growth elasticity of poverty, and another is growth elasticity of inequality. So 1% of income ensure you 2.6% of reduction in poverty in 2010, whereas inequality is higher, positive impact. So considering this type of inequality, even we need migration or urbanization for economic growth, because it helps to reduce your poverty. This is decomposition. I can put it. Decomposition of inequality is possible by Theil index. There is a between share, you see, it is increasing between two periods. And poverty also, you see, total intersectoral effect, there is 8.27. And due to population shift, migration, so there is also an effect. Is how 8.5 achieved. If you break down, you will find the percentage change also in rural area and urban area. It is impact. And this is for policy formulation. You can choose your poverty lines, and you can see the impact of reduction in poverty due to corresponding poverty lines. So CBN poverty line, this is existing from our HIES, it's official poverty statistics. In 2005, it was 40%, and 2010, 31.5%. If you shift your poverty line, then poverty rate would change. So it is policymakers' decision how they increase poverty line or how they increase mean consumption, then you will find your poverty rate. This is at a glance. Is I think other people also talked like population share and mean consumption, consumption inequality. So if you see this thing, you will find the difference between 2005 and 2010 and how it changes. If you see poverty share, in 2005 and 2010, almost share are same. means if you see the absolute number of poor, you will find more due to population growth and migration. But if you see the incidence, then the ratio almost same. So poverty could be at different levels. We usually talk about only national level, but for policy perspective, we need to think about regional poverty, even poverty at final level, and poverty at subgroups level. And when we talk about poverty statistics, particularly in Bangladesh, the first and standalone survey is HIS. But we have other tools also, like poverty mapping exercise, proxy means test formula, wealth quintile, and of course, multidimensional poverty index. And urban poverty can be characterized by, you see, 5 factors like migration, urbanization, urban agglomeration, informal sector, income variations. So all these things we try to address in our HIS currently fielded now. And how we address urban poverty in HIS, because if we not address properly, then the statistics may be misreported. Like when you determine sample size, we need to consider coefficient of variation, because in urban area, you know, it's heterogeneous. So income variability is pronounced. So we consider this thing in our current HIS. Then allocation, stratification, like explicit, implicit, and non-response. Now I would like to share with you the current HIS 2016. There is a big shift. We are going to provide quarterly estimate in addition to annual estimate, and for the first time, district level estimates in addition to division level estimate. So we will not have immediately poverty map for district level, because district estimate we will find from our direct estimate. So we will go for Upazila poverty map, and even we can try to produce union poverty map this time, because we have larger sample size. So we hope standard error will allow us to produce union poverty map. Then that would be a very great achievement for the policymakers for real interventions. So how we address this thing, sampling design, you see third bullet, urban areas of 4 divisions, Dhaka, Chittagong, Khulna, Rajshahi, are further stratified into urban and city corporation strata, capturing variability of city samples. So we already addressed in current HIS, and Monica already mentioned that slum issues also we address in our HIS this time. And if you see the third bullet, at the post-stratification stage, estimates for the city corporation level, only for Dhaka, Chittagong, Rajshahi, and Khulna, can also be provided subject to the achieved precision level. If standard error allow us, then we may provide 4 level poverty rates also, besides our other dimensions. And this is the SDG and poverty in all its forms everywhere. So all the indicators, I think, we can provide from our HIS. And the final slide. Poverty and inequality study should be done primarily at aggregate level. It's natural. But for deeper knowledge and clear understanding, poverty and inequality should be studied at different levels, different dimensions, different subgroups, different cross steps. Because what gets measured, you know, gets improved. So if you have data, then policymakers can intervene. So for interventions and affirmation of leave no one behind, all this should be crystal clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deepankar Roy. May I now invite Professor A.T.M. Nurul Amin of North-South University to make his presentation.
Next and forward. Thank you, Dr. Mujeri. First, a good feeling when I was listening to Dr. Deepankar Roy. In fact, in my slide, there is one slide on Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics publication of the labor force survey. It was a pleasant surprise to me the kind of improvement has taken place in Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics and publication. In which way, you have already seen the Pankar's presentation, but my feeling came from experience when I was doing informal sector research in 1978. Other than my primary survey in Dhaka city, I was trying to get information from the labor force survey reports of BBS. At that time, the BBS used to publish labor force survey very infrequently. Now, I guess this year, I was so surprised. In fact, I lived 22 years in Bangkok, and every year, the labor force survey in Thailand published in three seasons. So Bangladesh now, it seems, has started. The 2016 already, July, September round labor force survey has been published. And for my research on the labor force survey, which is so much based, at least for informal sector size estimation, magnitude, we need not just primary survey data, but we need more macro level data. So that's a big improvement. Now, on coming to my presentation, first I had a draft, in my draft a title of realities of informal sector vis-a-vis the urban poverty. But a young reader reminded me that reality is a very value-loaded word. Of course, I get passionate what I observe, what I see, but nevertheless, to respect to this young researcher, I took out the word reality. Now, the one optimistic scenario or outcome even that I have over the research for so many years on the informal sector, as a student of economics, we have been so excited by Arthur Lewis' economic development with unlimited labor supplies. Good, Professor Hume is from Manchester. And many of you would know that famous classical article was published in Manchester School of Bulletin, Economic Bulletin. So it's not a, these days journals, I hear impact factor of even 100. I thought impact factor ranges from 2 to 5, 6, 10. But they are apparently in the sciences, there may be journal of that impact factor. So we can see the education and universities, even a bulletin, what kind of things they used to publish. By living in 22 years in Thailand, I have seen Arthur Lewis economic development with unlimited labor supplies, how it became a real. In fact, a labor surplus economy has been turned into a labor scarce economy, and this is exactly what Arthur Lewis predicted. Many criticize his model for this duality approach, but he did not want to see duality persist. He was foreseeing how duality will be eliminated. And this is by using the labor surplus, how economic surplus will be created, and then the rural-urban dichotomy, duality will gradually be over. But why I am pessimistic about this, and this has nothing to do with Arthur Lewis, any mistake or any wrong assumption in Arthur Lewis. In fact, when Hossein Zillur Rahman was presenting, he showed 10 phases. One phase was that a parent's goal is to give education to that his son. In fact, UNESCO once asked me to do a study in Bangkok. You do informal sector research. Tell us what kind of education and training program we can mount for your informal sector workers. And I was surveying in the Bangkok street and Bangkok marketplaces, And when I was talking with one lady who was making some cakes kind of thing, and when I asked about her need, I thought maybe we'll come out with some information that would allow us to recommend some training for keeping accounts, maybe, so that pricing will be right. But do you know what she said? If you are serious, then take this child of my daughter to school, give her the education. So my pessimism lies here, the intergenerational transfer of poverty that is taking place and will be taking place, like in the old Indian caste system. In Bangladesh, a rickshaw driver's son may be becoming a rickshaw driver, a maid's or a daughter becoming a maid, or a daughter's maid may become a maid, and daughter's son may become a rickshaw driver. So that's the worst scenario. Now, question is, despite that optimism I have noted, what it is making, what's the difference? We must take that into account, and accordingly, we'll have to go ahead. I guess the difference comes from the fact, there also let me share with you that once in a Bangkok Post, there was a huge 2 pages coverage with a headline, "Today's Bangkok, yesterday's London." And the photo, the faces were taken from today's London, but the photo captions were written from a 1776 or 5, some of you know London Poor's book. Imagine, so 200 years ago, what has been written in that book, from that photo caption could be written for today's Bangkok. That was 1994. So then, what's the difference then? So the message there is, as was London, now as it is London, and today's Bangkok also will become like a London of today. But probably that will be a wrong expectation, particularly for a country like Bangladesh. As a populous country with 160 million people, I guess the Lewisian pattern is working, but with the difference of millions. Yes, Paris poor, London poor, we know. Maybe it has been several thousand, but we have several millions. So that is the reason that a rural subsistence sector and the capitalist economy that we have. In fact, Arthur Lewis did use that, and still it is valid. It is the capital economy sector. Okay, so the difference comes really from the magnitude. So instead of this, yes, we are having a very good economic growth, but still our economic growth, economic development, its momentum is not big enough to be close to any creation or utilization of surplus labor. Instead, we have got an urban subsistence sector within the urban economy. So now the duality, not between only rural urban, but the duality is created in the urban area itself. So still that optimism, resurgence of optimism we have in this sense, we can still use the surplus labor to create the economic surplus, and our development process can continue. But as I have said, the challenge is about the magnitude and how we cope with that. That require much stronger economic growth and development, but that does not take place suddenly. So that's why we also need a lot of other supportive policy. Okay, I think since I have this one. Yeah, allow me to also take note. I have conceived this informal sector with this three facet: people, activity, habitat. People, formally, this is the labor. Activity, little more analytically, this is the enterprise. And habitat, this is what we call slums and squatters. And we use labor force characteristics or employment characteristics to distinguish the informality and formality. Similarly, we use the enterprise characteristics to distinguish the informal and formal, and similarly the housing characteristics for the habitat part. I would not have time, but I have done work on other countries also, and we have shown how in informal sector declined in other countries, or a country like Bangladesh, why we have not been able to bring that. It is still more expansion of marginal occupations. So it's a very large size still. What is the problem? So these are some, so this is about three facets I mentioned. Then what I try to show that how the structural changes that is taking place. These are called stylized facts of development, but basic meaning is facts that everybody knows. That the agriculture sector is getting reduced in terms of GDP as well as employment share. Industrial and service sector are growing, but in our case, it is a little more like tertiarization instead of industrialization, because service sector is growing. So in this section, I try to show that how the structural change itself is defining the growth of the informal sector, and particularly its magnitude, and also whatever economic growth we are having, it's not good enough, but still what we are having, we are not having enough job growth. So this phrase, many of you are familiar with, this jobless growth that we are having in Bangladesh currently. Then in the fourth section, what I do from primary data, so until section 3, by using data of labor force survey data primarily, we make some estimates and also trend. And the trend is that informal sector is still expanding. And if we take the national labor force and informal sector measure, then it is around still 90%. Of course, informal sector was not coined by ILO with the notion of including the rural informal economy, because urban economy is supposed to give decent job, urban industrial job. But that's why when informal sector started to grow, an alternative name was necessary. But now, because of it is also used in the rural context, but if we take that, the size is even bigger. But if we only take the urban labor force and its informal component, we still have 70% plus kind. And from this sectoral finding, the few major one I did in recent years, so I present some data from this. And again, because of shortage of time, I cannot go into the details. On street trading, in fact, I guess Professor Hume mentioned, you see, we all have been influenced by Western education, but we should have at least some understanding that how we need to adapt that. I mentioned about the magnitude, so that already requires some changes. The urban planning, even recently I myself was involved in a Rajuk work for Dhaka plan, particularly for the employment, income, investment part. We somehow managed to bring informal sector there. Now, I'm sure the audience here who are from Bangladesh, our main complaint about the hawkers and traders, they occupy the footpath. But even after so many years of experience, we have not understood, or we do not say, we need to have footpath where hawkers also will be there, and we, those who want to walk, we shall also be walking. So if the planning paradigm remains as it has been, then it will be non-functional. Some of you know a doctor was killed, in fact, in Farmgate area when there was a problem between the hawkers and the footpath users, hawkers and the pedestrians. But this, some cities already have done. In fact, current Indonesian president, I don't know whether you know, that he was first a mayor of a small, relatively small city, maybe Surakarta, or I don't remember exactly. Then he became very successful, so his name became more known. Then he becomes a Jakarta governor. Now, when that success was demonstrated, people were saying, oh, he did that in a small city, so let him try to do in Jakarta. And he again was elected in Jakarta. And he did something for accommodation, physical accommodation of the informal sector in Jakarta. And he became quite known, and he's not an establishment man, and he has become the president of Jakarta. In one mayor's meeting, I waved one journal paper drafted by one of my Indonesian students, and I told one of the mayors, you would become the president of this country. Yeah, so physical accommodation, transport workers, until and unless public transport improves. I'm a bit saddened by Professor Wahiduddin Mahmood mentioned about that we cannot afford the mass transit, subway. Calcutta was not any richer than us when they had this subway, started working on that. So unless public sector, public utilities, public transport are enough, the informal sector expansion also will continue. And so what I'm saying, that we need a specific policy for each of these sectors for improving this situation. By the way, garments, beauty parlor is a new phenomena. Their main claim, their demand is that to be simply recognized as an industry. I guess they will be doing better if that's the case. And garment we usually consider as formal sector, but that's not the case. We have studied this, and we have found 70% plus percentage of workers, employment characteristics-wise, they also belong to the informal sector. So there are challenges, so I hope you get an opportunity to read the paper. I have made some real efforts for this, but because of time shortage, I cannot go into the details. Maybe let me see if I have something from the, I have also some pictures, but most of you are familiar with these faces in Dhaka. See, I was living in Dhaka. This is this construction sector situation. Accidents are so common. When I was serving the construction workers, asked about accident, and some of the accidents they don't even consider as accident. For example, you are not even, not to speak of wearing a shoe, even a sponge sandal sometimes they don't wear. And when a needle or what's that, parag, it enters, and even some, we asked, did it happen to you? Oh, it happened 10 times. So that's not even an accident. So this is the situation with which the workers work. In fact, many in construction sectors, seasonal migrants are very common. Women are in a very disadvantage. And by the way, the employer, one problem in construction sector particularly, you cannot identify who is the employer. Is the Sardar, is one subcontractor, or is the real estate company? So, and it's very primitive one. I have seen even people checking the muscle strength before taking you for the work there. And this is the scenario again in the construction sector. Waste sector has been growing. We, those work in the environment, we feel happy about resource recovery. recycling, but health hazards are very serious for these waste pickers. Repair works, of course, help us. Our Dholai Khal is very famous for metal work. Home-based worker, labor categories, of course, this is that labor force survey report I mentioned. This is the Coral slums, a huge one. This toilet looks relatively good. Again, Hossein Rahman mentioned, like one data we don't have, how many people are using a slum, a toilet in the slum area. So yeah, they'll ask, this looks good, like the lot of ITP indigenous people, both from Chittagong Hill Tracts and the Garos from Tangail area working there. So let me just concluding.
No, can you
this
conclude?
is our landlessness, assetlessness.
Can you please conclude? We don't
Yes,
have time.
done. Okay. So I'm saying at macro level what needs to be done, and at the micro level, and what needs to be done immediately, and what to be done short term, and what is to be done mid term or long term. So I hope that a conference like this, all the work PPRC with BBS doing, will create the necessary interventionary policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nurul Amin. I know what I think, I have already pointed out that, the full presentation will be shared with the participants. And I think we have already taken up a significant part of our lunch time. So I would request the other presenters to take as little time as possible so that, we don't eat up any further time of the lunch, So the next presenter is Mr. Shamim Hussain of BRAC Urban Development Program. Please be concise because it will be shared.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shamim Hussain from BRAC Urban Development Program. This is lunch time. This time talking about poverty is not fair. So I will take very short time, and directly I want to go to my research objective without any background. We are talking about multidimensional characteristics of urban poverty. So our research objective was to understand the multidimensional characteristics of urban poverty in different slums in different areas of Bangladesh. And another objective was to help to develop a toolkit that measures urban poverty. As you know, urban poverty is multidimensional, and it has many types of characteristics. So it is very, very important to understand the multidimensional characteristics of urban poverty. Before conducting the study, we asked several people randomly about, do you know about the urban poor? Do say where they live. People are saying that urban poor are slum people. People who live in slum, they are poor. So it's the general thinking as well. So if we explore the characteristics of slum dwellers, then we can also explore the characteristics of urban poverty as well. So this was a qualitative study, BRAC Urban Development Program initiated 2015, and with some projects and as a core activities to preparing slum socio-economic profile of slums in Bangladesh. It was another project activities. So these study also was one of the core activities of this program. We have collected qualitative data from Dhaka, Chittagong, Rangpur, and Borishal, almost 82 slums. The target population was slum people, and I want to go to the final results because there is a time constraint. Our study findings highlights that urban poverty is more dynamic than rural poverty. Sometimes the income of the people who live in slums are several times more than the rural poor inhabitants. But in the case of expenditure, the cost of living are so much that at the end of the month, their savings is minimal or nil. Some of the slum dwellers are not poor in terms of economic condition, as they have enough money to lead a good life outside slums, but they live in a slum for some economic gain or just for reason of habituations. In urban settlement, tenant security is uncertain compared to rural area. Urban poor are more vulnerable due to the limited access of services, bad governance, and eviction as well. Vulnerabilities that urban poor have been faced are unique in character compared to rural areas. So, to deal with urban poverty, we have to pay attention to all dimensions of it. Our study, if we go through the whole study, maybe we'll share next time. Our study implications is it will produce a new dimension of knowledge in the field of urban poverty in Bangladesh. It will provide better alternative to the stakeholder to investigate urban poverty in terms of urban dimension on a wider socio-economic scale rather than a few economic indicators. This study investigates diverse socio-economic indicators after assigning weights and adjustment for inequalities to describe an overall picture of deprivation and human rights violation using the selected urban dimension. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shamim Hussain. Now we are in a real dilemma. The time constraint. We have already eaten up almost half an hour of our lunch time, and we have, according to the program, we have our honorable panelist, Professor David Hume. And Professor David Hume has kindly agreed to share his valuable comments during session 3, which is on slum dwellers. So I thank you, Professor David Hume, for your understanding of the situation. And there were also 15 minutes allocated for the chair to sum up. So I don't dare to sum up now because of the time that we have already taken up. So that leaves with open discussion. So it is, I don't want to say there will be no open discussion, but if you want to agree and if you are compulsive that this is extremely important to discuss right now, I would then give an opportunity to discuss. Otherwise, maybe these can be shifted to the third session, which is slum realities. Probably it will have some relevance to the topics that are being discussed now. So I seek your opinion regarding open discussion. If you say you want to postpone it for the time being, we can. Huh? Okay. So the chief organizer has already given me the permission to postpone it. So I think I apologize to the presenters for really pressing too hard, which I didn't intend to do, but the circumstances was something that I had to. So I hope you apologize, and as I have told you, the organizers will be sharing the entire presentations with all the participants so that you will have a chance to access the entire presentation. So I once again thank you very much for your patience, and for this, encroachment of time, I take the full responsibility. So I thank you once again, participants. The lunch is served. It's a buffet lunch, and it's probably outside. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, lunch break will be 40 minutes. Please enjoy your lunch.